Hey, Marcus House with you here, and welcome to episode 19 in our quick progression series. Today we're continuing where we left off from our Jool mission. We were of course just about to do our Lathe landing and decouple from our little orbiter stage. Of course we first need to get ourselves down into the atmosphere, and we're just doing a slight retrograde burn here. For this landing we want to target around 44 kilometers from the surface. Of course we're going to then take the little orbiter stage of this and pull it back up into a higher orbit, so we're just decoupling there now. We'll just start by turning side on to the lander vessel, and we'll just do a very small burn just to get ourselves away. And then I'm just turning prograde here, and we'll just do a very small burn to get ourselves up to around that 81,000 mark. We'll just switch back to our lander using those square bracket keys, and then we're going to pop in our solar panels using the abort action group that we've set up. As you saw in the last episode, I've turned all of the inline reaction wheels off so that they don't make the whole vessel wobble around, so I'm turning that back on. So we're just time warping in, of course, until we hit Lathe's atmosphere. I've got this planned out, so we're going to land over here on this larger island of Lathe. Of course we'll turn retrograde so that our heat shield's pointing in the right direction for a start. And as we enter the atmosphere we're going to start picking up all of those science experiments, measuring anything we can from the atmosphere of Lathe. We can actually pick up all of these science experiments really easily. And you can see there, as we enter in, we're actually losing a lot of velocity very quickly, so this is all going to plan. The heat shield on this is extremely stable. You can see there we're just using our retrograde marker on our SAS mode. And there goes the orbiter probe above us there. As we demonstrated in the last episode, we can just pick up all of those science experiments. We don't need to transmit them back straight away. Dropping that parachute there, and as we get a little lower we're going to drop that heat shield. And we'll just pop those landing legs out ready for our landing. Again, obviously this episode's quite edited and sped up so that you're not sitting through too much. And touching down there on Lathe for the first time. This is a very tough body to land on, obviously, because there is such a small amount of surface area to land on. Of course, now we're touched down, we're safe to pull those solar panels back out using that action control. All of those science experiments that we picked up during the entry phase in the atmosphere, we can now transmit all of that science data back before we start picking up anything from Lathe's surface. And as we speed up the video so that you're not sitting through too much transfer of science data, you can see there that we've already accumulated a colossal amount of science instrument data. Just that seismic scan giving us over 110 science points there. In fact, with all the science we transferred from Minimus back in the previous episode, you'll find there'll be very little that we won't be able to unlock. Now, just a few interesting little tidbits about Lathe. It is actually the innermost of the 5 satellites of Jool, but the most interesting thing is that it is tidally locked to Jool. That means it's impossible to put any sort of satellite in a synchronous orbit around Lathe. The fact that we see Lathe with so much water and no ice could very well indicate a very high concentration of salts or other compounds. So we've just switched over to our main Jool mission vessel, and we're just going to decouple this next segment here. This particular probe is going to be on its way off to Vall. Of course we first need to set up an encounter, so we'll set Vall as the target, and we'll just check out those closest approach markers. We just need to do a very small retrograde burn here by the looks of it to set up an encounter with Vall, and there we go there, that'll do it. We'll just focus in there so we can just tweak that slightly. And that's about going to do us right there, so we'll time warp in until we enter Vall's sphere of influence. Just like Lathe, Vall is tidally locked to Jool, which means synchronous orbits here are also not possible. At some point it would be really good to see somebody do a return mission from Vall, because it is significantly more difficult than doing a moon landing and return mission. And that's not only because of the distance from Kerbal, but also because of the higher gravity of Vall. So we're just starting our retrograde burn here to get ourselves into a Vall orbit. And there we go there. We'll start off of course by grabbing all of that wonderful science data from space near Vall. As we're picking up all that science, we'll just talk a little about what tidal locking actually is. Essentially, this is the name that's given in a situation where an object's orbital period matches its rotational period. And this is a really great example with our own moon. The moon takes 28 days to go around the Earth, and it also takes 28 days to rotate once around its own axis, and this results in the same face of the moon always facing us at the Earth. Just finalising a lot of that science collection from space near Vall, and also space high above Vall as well. And after this is done sending, we're just going to head back to our space centre. Then we're going to head back into mission control, and here's a mission here for Explore Pol. Now this mission here is actually worth over 1.2 million in funds, so that's a fantastic mission to be able to pick up. Along with that, we're also going to pick up this science data from the surface of Laythe as well. That's going to be quite easy to grab. So we'll just head off via the tracking station, and we're just going to select that Laythe probe that's sitting there on the surface of Laythe. Now that mission there was worth over 250,000 in funds, so all we've got to do is grab a temperature scan and transmit that back. And transmission complete there now, so that's an easy 250,000 in funds. Now we've just got our other few missions left there, Explore Pol and Explore Bop. So with that being completed, we can now switch back over to our main mission vessel. And as you can see now, we've got 3 probe cores. We've got the 2 smaller ones and the one with the atomic rocket motor. So we'll just decouple the next one. You can probably guess now where the remaining probe cores are heading. This one in particular is going to be heading to Bop, so we're just going to start setting up our encounter. I was just going to see if I could get an encounter straight from doing a prograde burn, but of course we need to set our inclination correct, so we're warping around to that apoapsis marker, and we'll just set this up here to do our inclination change just at the lowest velocity that we possibly can, right on that ascending node. And now that our inclination is correct, we're now right to set up our manoeuvre. We'll drag that out from the periapsis there. And you can see there now that our closest approach markers are kind of behaving themselves. Bop actually has a very low gravity, so it's kind of hard to get the markers to behave themselves. In fact, you can see there that it's actually a little confused as to whether we've got an encounter or not. Sometimes that can happen with these very small bodies. It's a little frustrating. In this case, the encounter was fine, so we're at the periapsis and we're just doing a retrograde burn to get ourselves into a orbit of Bop. So we'll start grabbing all that wonderful science and transmitting that back from space high over Bop. While we're doing that first orbit, we're going to transfer all that wonderful science back, and as we come around to our periapsis marker, we're going to descend into Bop, and we're going to start grabbing all our science experiments from space near Bop. Just doing a fairly small retrograde burn here, and we're going to try to aim for this area here. It's quite flat in comparison to some of the areas of Bop. That gravity scan there worth 64 science points alone. As we come into land, of course, we're trying to find a fairly flat surface. The thing about Bop is it's quite like a gilly in Eve's orbit, in that it's extremely mountainous. Of course, that makes it very difficult to land on, just like it was landing on Gilly a few missions ago. As we get closer to the surface, of course, we've got to start wiping off that velocity, so we're doing the retrograde burn there. As you wipe off all that velocity, of course, you want to keep that nav ball pointed towards your retrograde marker, just so you can slowly adjust that rate of descent as you descend down onto the surface. Again, these satellites have got quite a high thrust-to-weight ratio, so you actually don't need all that as you're coming to land on a body like this. So we're going to just adjust that thrust limiter right down. That just gives you better control, of course, to just hover just above the surface and touch down there. There's the first touchdown we've ever had on the surface of Bop. And you'll notice there, as we start collecting our experiments, that we've still got a little fuel left. This amount of fuel would actually get us back into orbit just, so we could actually do some more experiments later in orbit if we needed to. Heading to the Space Center now and back to mission control. Again, it's great to keep coming back to see if there's any other missions you can grab while we're on this big mission, and there's one there for science from space around Jool. And coincidentally, we've got a science data from the surface of Bop mission there that we can actually do straight away. There's even another satellite position adjustment mission there that we could also pick up, but we'll leave that for the moment. Via the tracking station, we'll head straight back to our little lander sitting on the surface of Bop, so that we can instantly complete this new mission. As always, we don't need any real science data to transmit back, we can just grab a temperature scan and transmit that straight back for an instant completion of that mission. So now that that's done, we'll head back to our main vessel, which has still got 2 probe cores left attached to it. It's again going to be very easy to complete that Jool mission. We can instantly just come in, grab a gravity scan here as an example from space high above Jool, transmit that back, and we've just completed that mission there as well. Those 2 missions we just completed there were worth almost 600,000 in funds, so that was easy money. The next body we need to explore is Pole, but we've got a little bit of a problem here at the moment. We are actually going to encounter Tylo. Of course, we don't want that encounter to happen. We've already been to Tylo, so we're going to do a slight prograde burn just to make sure that we miss that encounter. Now, Pole actually has a slightly inclined orbit at 4.25 degrees, which is quite a little way off what the other bodies are. So we need to adjust that, and we're going to do that with our atomic stage. And there we go, we're at 0 degrees there now. We've done that essentially because we want as much fuel possible for our little Pole lander. So our atomic motor stage had plenty of delta V left. So we'll just decouple there, and we want to just get our last little mini satellite all ready for an encounter with Pole. So we're just turning prograde there and just getting away from our other vessel. And we need to activate our engines. In map view, we'll just head over and make sure that we've got Pole selected as our target. We want to get that apoapsis marker right up so that it's touching and intersecting with Pole's orbit lines. Just trying to get our encounter there, but it's just not quite working for us. Pole has got a very low gravity, so it's hard to get this encounter right. We'll just do our burn there though to bring our apoapsis up there to that intersecting line. At this point I actually had to reload my game because my closest approach markers weren't showing up at all, so we're just doing a very slight retrograde adjustment here just to get that to match up perfectly, and you can see there just how touchy this approach is. Pole actually has the second lowest gravity of any other body in the game with the exception of Gilly around Eve. That makes your encounter really tricky to get perfect, but it looks like we've got that sorted there now. Focusing the view on Pole there, we're just bringing that periapsis right in as close as we can get. Just doing a very small burn in our normal direction just to bring that inclination up so that we're going to pass over the equator of Pole. So there we go there, we'll just set our maneuver here to get into an orbit of Pole. Just time warping in there so that we get into the sphere of influence of Pole so that we can start picking up all those wonderful science experiments from space high above Pole. Transmitting all of that science back. Lots and lots of science, and then we'll just time warp into our periapsis marker. Just going to wipe off all that velocity with a retrograde burn, turning our thrust limiter back up of course. As we come in for a landing on Pole, we can just talk a little about some of the strange characteristics of it. Obviously, as we said before, it's got a bit of a strange inclination compared to the rest of the bodies around Jool. And that could very well mean that Pole is actually a large captured asteroid rather than one of the bodies that formed naturally. Just turning our vessel vertical there, and we're going to start picking up all those science experiments near Pole and transmitting all those back. Just like a few of the other bodies around Jool, Pole is also tidally locked, again meaning it's pretty much impossible to get into any sort of synchronous orbit. Just hovering above the surface there slightly, and touchdown for the first time on Pole as well for this mission. I'd folded the solar panels away just prior to landing just so that they didn't break, and because we want to put them back out again, we're just hovering just slightly above the surface so that we don't get flung up. As we touch back down on Pole and start doing our typical science experiments, we can just list down a few of the biomes that are actually in existence in Pole. So we've got the poles, we've got lowlands, highlands, and midlands. Again, we've still got quite a bit of fuel left in this little lander, so there's no reason why you couldn't use this to jump to a few more biomes and actually pick up science from those locations as well. To keep this mission moving along though, we won't do that, we'll keep on moving. We'll head ourselves back over into map view. We'll select our last remaining vessel with our atomic engine. And we'll just start doing all of the science experiments we haven't yet grabbed hold of from space high above Jool. Of course, Jool is inspired very much from Jupiter in our own solar system. It's impossible to land on Jool itself as it is a gas giant. Again, we're just going to head back into our space center and we're just going to go back to our mission control, see if there's more missions. And there we are again, science data from space around Laythe. We'll grab that one. And entering the atmosphere of Jool, which is actually also very perfect. I must say actually we've had a tremendous amount of luck with the missions we've been jumping back to get here. I hope everyone's that lucky. So due to that first mission we picked up, we'll head back over to our Laythe orbiter. Again, we'll just go off and grab a temperature scan from that vessel and transmit that back. And there we go, contract complete there already. That one there was almost worth 200,000 in funds alone. Back now to our vessel that is orbiting Jool, our very last vessel. Now to complete that last mission and actually take a sample from the atmosphere of Jool, we need to get down low enough to enter the atmosphere, but not so low that we're going to lose our orbit or burn up, of course. Because Jool's orbit speed is so high, we need to do a burn here of almost 500 meters per second just to get our periapsis right down there. Just finishing off that burn there, and we'll focus right in on Jool so we can very carefully tweak our periapsis marker there. Now the atmosphere of Jool comes right up to 200,000 meters, so we want to just come just slightly under that value. What that's going to allow us to do is skip into the atmosphere, pick up our science instrument measurements, and then skip straight back out to transmit them back, without any damage of course. So with our periapsis at 198,000, we'll pop those solar panels in. Turning retrograde there, and we'll just pick up a few of our science experiments from space near Jool. And we've just entered the atmosphere, completing that mission already. You could do as many passes through the atmosphere of Jool as you would prefer to do. There could be all sorts of science experiments you could do measurements on in there. Now that we're out of the atmosphere, we'll just pop our solar panels back out. Looking back, it would have been quite handy to actually have an atmosphere analysis instrument unit on that particular vessel. We could have grabbed a few more science points there, but no matter. We've just finished collecting a whole bunch of science experiments from space near Jool and a few from inside the atmosphere, so we're transmitting all that back. And now we just need to correct our orbit to ensure that we don't keep passing back through the atmosphere, so we're time warping up to that apoapsis marker. All we need to do here now obviously is just do a very small prograde burn just to pull our periapsis back up out of that danger area. And now that our vessel is safe there, we're going to head back to the Space Center for the very last time in this episode. Now again, you can keep coming back to mission control, picking up missions like this one here for Vall. There's just loads of them to pick up. There's another one here for science from space around Tylo. But we're going to leave those missions for this episode and we're going to head back over into our Research and Development Center. We have there very close to 10,000 science points, a colossal amount of science there that we can spend. And we've gathered the vast majority of that in the last 2 episodes, so we're heading into the Research and Development Center there. We should almost, I think, have enough science points here to unlock everything. Advanced unmanned tech, automation, advanced motors, can't go wrong with large probes as well, very heavy rocketry, large volume containment, heavy aerodynamics and heavy landing, experimental aerodynamics, performance and fuel systems, specialised construction, advanced metalwork, composites, metamaterials, and command modules. We did have enough to unlock them all. Everything unlocked, the entire lot. And we still had over 1,300 science points there and have over 5 million in funds now. So as we start analysing our mission contracts here, we're going to end the video there. I hope you enjoyed that video. That has been the most epic mission to put together that I have done yet. If you have any questions for me, please do whack them in the comments below. If you have any suggestions on what we could have done to make that mission even more epic, let me know in the comments below as well. Thanks very much to all of you that have subscribed, and for those that haven't yet, please do subscribe to see more. Please do support the channel. Follow me on Twitter at MarcusHouseGame, and we'll see you in the next video. 4, 3, 2, 1, and firing, off we go. The thrust to weight ratio on this thing is pretty high, so we're leaning immediately over to that 10-degree mark so that we can begin doing our gravity turn. Just pointing to that pro-grade marker on the nav ball. As we've taken off, I've realised that the gimbal limit on the main...